Sorry, I got so zooted on caffeine I had to take a nap. Okay, like I said at the beginning, this is 100% experiment, and I realized that this story has many quick scene changes. So if I just pause and say next scene, just expect a different scene with different characters talking, and we'll just try that. And if that sucks, tell me. Babylon Babylon, the planet of unspoiled nature, as it was known throughout the cosmos, looked exactly like the third planet from the sun in the Milky Way, Earth, if humans had never mucked about on it. The abundance of water, mountains, plains, flora, and fauna could perhaps also be the reason why Babylon was mistaken for Earth. Although Babylon was the third planet from its own sun, located in its own galaxy, the Crabwalk Nebula, Babylon did in fact have two moons in comparison to the singular moon of Earth. The last remarkable point was that all this flora, fauna, and Babylon itself were comprised of silicon, not carbon, like Earth was. Due to the half-life decay of silicon, every 150 years, in a cycle, the landscape, trees, plants, and all animal life natural to Babylon would evolve itself, and everything would look totally new and novel. Babylon was in fact inhabited by peaceful and synergistic sentient beings. Due to their tenure on Babylon, they were known throughout the Crabwalk Nebula as Babylonians. Their bodies were made of iron shells covered in ruby rin, a shiny red pigment. Their insides were filled with pure fluorine, and they had greenish hair of chlorine. They were in fact the last surviving members of their race, Nebulans, and their original home had been Nebulus 9. The history of Nebulus 9 is indeed tragic. This planet had been disintegrated from a fabulous mecca of civilization and technology that peaked with a global civil war that spurred from a joke from one Nebulan to another that their insides were indeed not fluorine, but rather cream filling. The 20 refugees were lucky to have escaped with their lives. The 20 flew in loose formation to appear as falling stars and not to attract attention to themselves. The 6 adults, who had gathered a few children each, crooked one under each arm and pinned one with each leg, all while flying. 6 adults flying and carrying 14 total kids, the Nebulus 9, as Nebulus 9 dissolved into non-existence. Nebulans could always be seen in pairs, whether it was each one with their own twin sibling or with their life mate as adults. 8 of the children were now parentless thanks to this civil war. These were, in their own twin pairings, the survivors, Luca and Liam, Reese and Reed, Apollo and Atticus, and River and Ryder. Also present were 3 families, each with 4 members. First were parents Remington and Kensington with their twins, Lachlan and Lennox. Second were parents Arabella and Percival and their twins Penelope and Persephone. Finally were the parents Seraphim and Sebastian with their twins Talia and Tiana. The first thing the Nebulans did upon touchdown on Babylon was to headcount and to slowly allow themselves to begin grieving the loss of their home. For many cycles of Babylon's twin moons, the refugee Nebulans were hypervigilant of their sanctuary. Indeed, all of them had to adjust while learning to navigate their new environment and their emotions. Babylon was rich with wilderness and adventure, yet joy was elusive due to the recent dire loss. Next scene. I had wondered, said the Mason, who was somewhere light years from anywhere, if it were time for another new toy. Next scene. At pub on the island, the forest was still, as the sun had recently set. A buck deer near the weasel's family hollow tree was passing by, and his antler rack produced a cascade of blended shadow and light inside the weasel's home. Just then, 3 small voices rang out in protest. Wait, wait, wait! You said that wrong, Mom and Dad. You forgot Quila. Pinky grabbed Flint's opposite shoulder in smooth fashion, and they were standing side by side, and pulled him in for a whisper. Flint grinned and went to go fetch something. My strong, handsome young weasels, my silly boys, you must remember to let us tell the story, said Pinky. Flint placed 4 candles on the kitchen table and lit them all with a match. Wow. Now then, face the wall, boys, said Flint. With much grumbling, the weasels spun on the floor and looked at their parents' shadows. The boys also then saw their father's shadow smooch their mother's shadow, causing her tail to swish yet again. Flint and Pinky now had high command of their son's attention, and in this simple story, we had just been elevated into shadow theater. The weasel pups bounced in place on the floor in front of the wall, watching their parents' stagecraft. Next scene. The Quila. Crispin Llewellyn Chandler, the director of Foundry Inc., despite his immeasurable wealth and far-reaching influence, was extremely vexed this day. The director found himself far from the safety and comfort of his office. He was indeed inside the establishment pub on the island, nursing his woes with his favorite libation, emphysema tequila. In truth, the director would soon need medical attention if he continued at a pace like this. 3 weasels had been watching him for some time from their table in the back. Oh, it's hopeless, bawled the director, sipping on his drink. The Weasel brothers, Think, Thank, and Thunk, gave each other several side-eye glances until Think tipped his toothpick at a steep angle, and they all rose and approached the director's table. The director had just finished blowing his nose and was refolding his embroidered handkerchief and rose to greet the 3 strangers. My good man, said Think in a streetwise drawl, whatever is the matter with yous? The weasels were very aware of who this man was and slightly impressed that he had slipped away from Foundry Inc.'s security detail. Introductions were made, a sealed bottle of emphysema tequila was ordered, and through misguidance and slovenly decisions, the weasels and the director were entered into a wager that would, if accomplished, prove to be extremely lucrative and virulent indeed. Do you beagles even have a spaceship? Remarked the director. Think pointed at his brothers with the toothpick from his mouth to hush them, and then drawled to the director. Of course we do. But how will you boys blow up the whole planet? My good man, reassured Think, I have no doubt that my brothers and I can help you with your goals. Those last 2 spoken sentences are exactly where communication broke down between the director and the Weasel brothers. The director had intended to say glow up, but at this point of inebriation, he fell out of his what fell out of his mouth was blow up. Think, Thank, and Thunk had definitely heard him say blow up, as in to detonate. The director's plans for a legacy of ecological conservation concerning Babylon would now be as elusive as literally trying to grab smoke with his bare hands. The director's face felt very warm as he declared, I'm so glad I met you, Beagle boys. The feeling is mutual, a sneered Think. Then 4 glasses were clinked, and the wager was sealed. Next scene. The director decided to call his front office secretary, so he pressed a button on the desk phone and waited. Yes, sir. Ophelia, who are those 3 Beagle gents I bet with on the Babylon contract? They are weasels, sir. They are? Oh dear, this is hot water. The director then had the sense that he had already had this conversation with Ophelia. Next scene. By this time, the 20 Nebulan refugees had been living on Babylon through 6 silicone half-life decay cycles for a total of 900 years. They had now stopped correcting visitors who called them Babylonians. The Nebulans treated their new home with great care and respect. The 6 parents used much esteem and deference to instruct all the Nebulan children in proper handling of each other and also each other's emotions. The planet of Babylon, with its 150-year regrowth cycle, taught all of the Nebulans the most important lesson: change is constant and inevitable. To resist change is absolutely possible, but one must be willing to accept any unforeseen consequences of your resistance. The most potent examples of this were brought out in the flying lessons given by the 6 adults to the 14 children. The adults took turns with flight theory and flight practice. Seraphin, Sebastian, Remington, Kensington, Arabella, and Percival loved and cared for all 14 Nebulan kids equally. Each adult contributed their own unique skills and personalities into flight training. As it were, teaching children who were made entirely of iron how to fly was not the simplest of tricks. At first, false starts were to be expected, and then once the kids learned to become airborne, crash landings were common. The adults were always patient, however stern, in constantly reminding the kids never to fly over water while still learning, lest the reaction with their hair should damage the environment of Babylon. The children loved all the natural wonders of this planet. It had so many chaotically beautiful forms of organic life that only silicon-based organisms could produce. In comparison to their birthplace of Nebulus 9, which was metallic, orderly, and sterile, Babylon was a majestic pigsty of soil, water, plants, and animals that each needed specific consideration to be properly appreciated. For instance, once while exploring, Arabella, Percival, and their twins Penelope and Persephone discovered creatures similar to a honeybee on Earth, except that they were black and silver striped on their bodies. As the quartet investigated the silver bees' hollow honey tree home, they learned the bees' comb structure in spiral shapes that stored nectar which looked like quicksilver, not amber like Earth's honeybees. Arabella and Percival took quick measurements on the spiral combs, and it seemed each spiral had been constructed to mimic the golden ratio spiral. On a different day, the 10 boys, twins, Apollo, Atticus, River, Ryder, Luca, Liam, Reese, Reed, Lachlan, and Lennox, were in the forest. The boys were all playing a game of stealth with each other when some of them spotted indigenous animals they had never seen before, a sounder of feral boars that were astonishingly massive. So, of course, the 10 iron boys bum-rushed the wild swine while screaming at full volume. The absolute mayhem that ensued was hilarious. Each adult hog was 4 times the size of just one boy, so neither could seriously injure the other. What happened next was an hour of wrestling, yelling, and squealing that the feral boars also seemed to enjoy. At one point, Apollo and Atticus, Lachlan, and Lennox attempted to surround the largest boar, lift it up, and fly away with the beast. This only resulted in a false start in their flying, and the massive swine being tipped over and producing immobilizing belly laughter with all the boys. At a later date, all 14 children went to the same area of the forest, and the 10 boys were trying to trick Talia, Tiana, Penelope, Persephone into surrounding a wild boar and flying with it in their group. The 4 iron girls chose the largest hog, rushed it, lifted it, and flew straight up into the air and hovered. "Like this?" asked Penelope and Persephone. The boys all looked around, trying not to let their failed trying not to let on about their failed flying hog attempt. I think they were expecting something else to happen, said Talia and Tiana. The girls softly set the boar on the ground, and it made a blood-curdling squeal and ran away, as it was not accustomed to being suspended in midair. Then the girls instigated a dirt clod throwing war with the boys, which, despite being outnumbered, the girls won because they had learned to fly first. Babylon had an immensely diverse landscape and equally diverse flora and fauna to match. The adults had decided to run 3-person scouting missions with one adult from each family for security and objectivity in reporting and mapping Babylon. While the scouting party flew out, the remaining 3 adults taught the children the history of Nebulous 9, its fairy stories from their culture, and the previous scouting report of their last exploratory flight. Soon the children began asking questions about whether they would be taught interplanetary flight like that which was used to save their very lives. The 6 adults had always had the same cautionary message. Each of them was to Each of them was made mainly of iron, and that the thrust and trajectory required to get into orbit must be very carefully considered. Some of the kids were not so sure about all this, and they believed the adults were being overprotective. After all, they had witnessed these same 6 adults carry and fly away with all of them while their home was exploding and melting so long ago. Some of the boys decided to have their own flight practice. Unknown to the renegade boys, the 4 girls had overheard and chose to spy on the boys in case they got in over their heads. Luca, Liam, Reese, and Reed had a plan to fly at night by moonlight as to not attract the adults' attention. The boys chose an open field well away from the water with a clear view of Babylon's twin moons. Penelope, Persephone, Talia, and Tiana watched the headstrong boys make attempt after attempt, and with one crash landing after the next, the girls were relaxing in the fact the boys' attempts were futile. Penelope and Persephone whispered as they crouched down so low that they lost sight of the boys, saying, "Why must they behave like this?" Talia and Tiana, also crouching and unable to see, said, "I have no idea." Suddenly, a shout was heard. "Woohoo!" The 4 voices in unison from the open field. Luca and Liam had kneeled behind Reese and Reed and had heaved them up as they launched themselves for flight. Reese and Reed were now airborne. The boys did not consider the twin moons and the distorted shadows that were cast by their light. Reese and Reed met in midair and cracked their skulls so hard together that they stopped flying and started rather feebly free-falling upwards toward outer space. "Fly!" shouted Talia and Tiana. The girls launched themselves skyward, trying to reach the knocked-out boys. Suddenly, 6 large red flashes of light sped past them, followed by a rush of air so strong it knocked the girls down to the field. Luca and Liam stared as the girls in disbelief. Then the 6 large red flashes of light Then the 6 large red flashes of light landed hard in the field, spraying soil everywhere. Arabella and Kensington were each carrying one knocked-out iron boy. All 6 adults wore expressions on their faces displaying that they were indeed not amused. "We were just," said Luca and Liam. "We can't even. Just don't. Not now," said Percival, interrupting loudly. Luca and Liam fell silent and their heads hung low. Everyone marched back soberly. Once all 20 of them were gathered, Reese and Reed, who were still knocked out, were propped up, and Arabella and Kensington by Arabella and Kensington for all to see. For a brief time no one spoke, and then Seraphim began. Would anyone else care to fly to outer space tonight? Will they be okay? Asked Ryder and River, testing the silence. Yes, they are not badly injured, said Remington. Sebastian preached. This is it. Right here. This is what we are, what you see here. Only 20 of us. This is your community. Some of you kids are not our actual children, but understand this. The 6 of us adults love you all and want to give each of you everything as if it were our own. No playing favorites. Each of you is valuable and worthy of love. Arabella spoke up now. I have a question for everyone. Raise your hand if, Arabella raised her own hand, if you can fly as fast as I can. Who here can? All 6 adults had their hands raised now. All 14 children were silent, especially Reese and Reed, who were still knocked out. Kensington now took her turn to speak. We know this is not ideal. I miss Nebulous 9. We can get through this together, but you please have to trust us. Just then, Reese and Reed woke up and they were grateful to feel loved. Next scene. Dahlia and Giselle were foxwomen from planet Vulpes, confidential secretaries to Crispin Llewellyn Chandler, director of Foundry Inc., and excellent baristas. Dahlia and Giselle had a good sense about the director regarding when he was in need of a closed-door meeting. As an example, the girls could sense when such a meeting would be called, as they were already busy steaming milk and grinding espresso. In their office was a table in the middle of the 3 lounge chairs with a plate of the director's favorite peanut butter and chocolate cookies. 2 sharp knocks were sounded at the door, connecting the director's office with their own. We're going to take a break.